coming up on this episode of The Prodigal Life. And now you're going to waste your life living with a bunch of men? What's wrong with you? What am I supposed to tell my friends?
Oh.
So I told him what he could tell his friends.
Right.
And then I didn't speak to him for 18 years.
Oh, man.
As far as I was concerned, on that day, he died. He was dead.
In the 12-step program, of course, there's a period in it where you have to make amends. And without making amends, I mean, it's longer in the prayer. You can't, because you don't ever want to make amends where you harm another.
Right.
Because what good, you're not doing any good by hurting somebody else. I can remember the hardest amends I had to make was with my children.
Are you away from your faith?
Do you wonder why you're Catholic? Do you really want to know more?
If God is so good and he made a beautiful and amazing world, then why does life feel so messy and difficult and painful sometimes?
Do you feel stuck and want to take your faith to that next level? Join us on The Prodigal Life as me and Ellen and Nick have an honest and open discussion about all things important in our faith life. Welcome to The Prodigal Life. And welcome back to The Prodigal Life. I'm Deacon Burke Sivers, and there's Ellen and Nick. And we'd like you to find out more about the great work that we're doing here. Go to the prodigallife.com website. There you'll find all the previous episodes of the podcast, information about all of us and the work we're doing in the Lord's Vineyard. And you can also support the show. You can go to our website there and you can patronize us at the different giving levels. But what that does, it helps us to continue to do the show and to spread God's message of love and mercy and peace to anyone that wants to listen. So we're truly grateful for your support and all of you who have been supporting us.
Yeah, we really are. Thank you. The other way you can be a part of our family is to go to, on your desktop, laptop, or tablet, to the awakenapp.io. Or you can go to your Google or Apple Play Store and download the Awaken Catholic app with the sun. Go to the one with the sun. It's a great way for you to connect with all the different podcasts, the music, the prayers, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that's really cool about it is they have a really safe 100% Catholic messaging app that operates just like any other messaging app, except for the fact that it's a little bit safer and you can have it work even when all the rest of them shut down.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Awesome.
Amen. So today is going to be about divine mercy. And we're going to focus a little bit on suicide, self-harm, addictions, different experiences in our lives, and how God's mercy, how we perceive it, and how hopefully, based on having Deacon Harold, he'll be able to talk to us a little bit about all of that in theological terms. And it's going to be a harder show. I know we laugh and we joke around and everything else, but this is a pretty serious topic, and with so much despair and anxiety and depression and other things going on in these uncertain times that we're living in, it's a real thing that we need to talk about, and we hope we hope we can help someone, because that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, that's right. So we talk about divine mercy. Really what we're talking about is the Father's merciful love. And to really get a wonderful understanding, I'm sure we'll have a link to St. John Paul II's document on divine mercy, Dives in Misericordiae, rich in mercy, which comes from the scriptures, which says God is rich in mercy. And he has a whole, it's just absolutely beautiful, where he goes, does a long reflection on the prodigal son, for example,
Nice.
Talking about how God's mercy is manifest in Jesus' teaching and his parables, and how it's connected to our lived experience every day. It's just,
wonderful.
It's one of my favorites by him, actually, and which made an impact on me in my own life dealing with divine mercy with my father, right?
Share a little bit about that,
because I think I may have mentioned this on an earlier episode, but we're from Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a very popular singer, songwriter, touring musician. Probably where I get my musical abilities from my dad. But he lived like one. So when we came to the United States, he did not come with us. And when he finally did join us, we found out very quickly that he loved three things: womenizing, alcohol, and cigarettes. My father has 15 other kids from other women
That you know of.
that we know of, besides the 4 of us with my mom. My father also drank, and if you come from a household where alcohol is an issue, I don't even have to tell you about the hurtful and painful and embarrassing moments that come from living in a household like that, where you wish to God you lived at your friend's house rather than have to go home to your own house. You know, my father was not a person of faith. He did not go to church, not baptized. The only time I ever heard him use God's name was as a curse. And, you know, my mom, I think, tried to hold the family together as best she could until she just couldn't do it anymore. And like I mentioned before, that they gotten divorced, which made a big impact on the 4 of us kids. But there's also a little, to be honest with you, there's also some relief there.
Yeah.
You know, that we don't have to deal with this anymore. But we left the home that we grew up in. I remember my brother picking this before 9/11, right? Where you could actually go to the gate and pick people up. My brother was waiting for me to get off the plane, and then my first thing I said to him was, "Where do we live now?" Because when we moved and sold the house, all that, our childhood home, I was still in college, so I was like, okay, well, where do we live now? So we went to this new, and it never felt like home. From the first time I stepped in the house, saw the house, to the time I left for the last time in that house, never felt like home. Never. But the things got bad with my dad is when I joined the monastery. You know, when I entered the Benedictines, I went and had a conversation with my dad out of respect, just to tell him what I thought I'd be doing for the rest of my life. And it did not go well at all.
Why is that?
Basically, he said, "You're going to do what? You're the first person in our family ever to go to college.
Right.
You go to Notre Dame. You got an economics and business degree. And now you're going to waste your life living with a bunch of men? What's wrong with you? What am I supposed to tell my friends?"
Oh.
So I told him what he could tell his friends.
Right.
And then I didn't speak to him for 18 years.
Oh, man.
As far as I was concerned, on that day,
He died.
he died. He was dead. In fact, I hated him so much that when my kids asked where their grandfather was, I told them to their face that he was dead.
Wow.
So hatred, resentment, anger, all the things that divine mercy is supposed to heal.
Yeah.
Hello, been there.
Been there.
But many of us have been there. I mean, I don't think there's a person that's watching or listening right now who has not been in a position where they needed God's merciful love, where they felt so separated from other people. You know, we may have, like you said, we're going to talk about suicide, right? Somebody that committed suicide or
Self-harm,
or abuse, or you may have been sexually abused yourself, or you may be divorced, or you're estranged from your kids because they're not practicing your faith, and there's all this tension. I mean, everybody's been through something really hard, and that's why we need divine mercy.
100%. 100%. You might want to share with them that you did reconcile before he died.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
Okay, we will. We'll get back there, which is that's a happy thing. So we'll have some happiness. What about you, Nick, in divine mercy?
Well, man, I'm still kind of caught up in the story you were telling, Deacon. So I'm having a hard time thinking about my own stories right now. Just a lot of
it's a hard topic.
A lot of what you shared. I mean, we have very different stories, but some of the things that you shared, like, really kind of triggered some real negative, memories and stuff for myself, even though they were different. But that kind of just goes to show that, man, we all have stuff. We all have stuff, and it's so hard. Man, what was the original question? I'm sorry.
Well, we're just talking about God's mercy and how it is applicable in your life, and if you've had experiences with times when you've had to dig really deep to find mercy, or if you had a friend that tried to commit suicide, or God forbid a friend that was raped, or you know what I mean, things like that require you to really rely heavily on God.
So literally every item you just listed as options for me to talk about, the answer is yes to each one of those. I mean, so most recently, I had to really dig deep to muster some of that divine mercy. When someone really close to me, like, really, really hurt me. And it was just difficult to even have conversations with them and make eye contact while talking to them, just because there was so much hurt in me. And it was very difficult to find that mercy. And it took a while to work up to a point where I like kind of what got me there was realizing that I had to love this person for who they were and for who they are, not for who I wish they were. I couldn't wait for them to be someone that I wanted them to be. I had to love them for who they are. And because I can't live with that feeling of hurt and that resentment. And you got to just get to that point where you don't let the ways in which someone else hurt you dictate how your life is going to be. So that was that. And man, the suicide question, that has been so relevant in my life for so many years. My sophomore year in high school, one of my best friends since childhood killed himself. We met in second grade, and I still remember that, meeting him to this day, because we met in preparation to receive First Holy Communion in the classes for that. And when we met, we were in the pews next to each other, and we sat next to each other, and we just started a really beautiful friendship. And we so many sleepovers over the years into high school, in high school we kind of started hanging out with new people, but that was really, really hard because nobody saw it coming. And then my junior year, someone else killed themselves in my high school. And then we had a house guest in my house when I was in high school, and he was threatening that he was suicidal, the house guest. And so we sent him to Flower Hospital here in Toledo, Ohio, where they have that's where you go if you're struggling with that. And while there, he killed himself. And so suicide's been like a really rampant part of my
100%.
existence, and I know that that's true for a lot of people. And all in all, in my time in high school, 3 students killed themselves, one of them being that best friend of mine. And then that house guest. And then in my own life, like in my darkest times, a little bit in high school, but especially when I like left home and moved to Miami, Florida, and I was like real lonely and searching and not finding answers and real dark places. I just didn't know what reasons there were to keep existing. And so like occasionally I considered the possibility of not continuing to exist. Thanks be to God, I'm still here.
Praise the Lord.
So yeah, that's
I mean it's hard, and I always think about Father Chris Alar, because he talks about divine mercy and suicide. He has a beautiful book. It's called After Suicide, which we'll put a link up to that as well. And I went to a talk about that, and he talked about how God is outside of time and space, and how we just because I think a lot of people think, gee, if somebody kills themselves, they're going directly to hell. And I don't know that we're in charge of, what God's going to do and what God's not going to do. And that we still should be praying always for those souls that have injured themselves or, God forbid, killed themselves, because you never know. And his explanation is much more beautiful. He has talks on it that you can download as well. And I highly recommend going to that if suicide's touched your life. The first time I was ever exposed to suicide, I was 12 years old. And my boyfriend at the time, a long time ago, tried to. And my mother was a nurse. It was an RN. And I can remember not knowing what to do, because I knew what he had done. And I just ran downstairs, and I got my mother, and my parents left in the car and drove over there, and they called the ambulance and did all the stuff. And by the grace of God, he's fine. And he is, and just by the grace of God, it didn't. But suicide's impacted our family a great deal. My youngest daughter, God bless her, her best friend, in high school, and it really changed her, because she just, she didn't know what, you know what I mean? You just don't know what to do. And it's, and, you know, as a parent, you know, it's hard to know with teenagers, you know what I mean? How they're processing things and what they're doing. And so you miss a lot of it. And, you know, because you're doing the best you can, you know, and that's where I think God's mercy is greatest, because I think even sometimes children will, you know, even try to harm themselves or to kill themselves. And, you know, and the parent may not be aware. I mean, I know that was very true for me. I didn't know about some of the very dark things that were going on in some of my children's lives, and their friends. And it's hard. It's really hard. And, you know, at that time I didn't have as a relationship with Christ like I have now. And so that made it even more difficult, because you know, you're trying to be self-reliant, and self-reliance is like futile. I mean, you're doing the best you can. And it's really, really hard. You know, dealt with, you know, sexual assault and different rapes, you know, things like that. I mean, you know, I dealt personally with that, in college, and, it was very hard. It was very, very hard. It was a very, being raped is atrocious. It's taking something that you're not supposed to take from another human being. And it makes you feel pretty powerless, and very, very dirty, very undeserving of anything. And I was very young. I was only 18.
I'm so sorry.
And, it was horrible. You know, it's horrible. It's just a horrible experience. But you also, you know, I never wanted to get vengeance towards the person. There was actually 2 in a 6-month period when I was at college. I was like, college was not for me. Wow. But it was a very difficult time. But I never ever wanted to seek revenge or anything against them. Innately, it's funny how God builds people. You know what I mean? Because if you look, you know, through history and even through people that go through hard things that come out, or, you know, persevere or come out on the other side, I honestly believe it's God's mercy and his grace. It's something that he gives the person so that they can, you know, push through, so that maybe they can help another person, or you know, do what needs to be done. And I think that's ultimately what I figured out. You know, I wanted to forgive the person, you know, more than I wanted to injure the person. Even though I felt horrible and could barely process what was going on. I mean, you really have to hate yourself a whole lot to want to hurt another person that badly. And that my heart just breaks for that. Because, see, in every crime, there's 2 victims.
Yeah.
And people don't like to talk about that because it's uncomfortable, because everybody always wants to go out and, you know, get all the vengeance and, you know, the resentment and the anger and everything else. But the sad thing about it is, if you step back and you look at a situation where there's a crime and a victim, that means that there was another crime that was committed to the person that committed the crime. Yeah. And if you don't break the cycle, it's just going to continue.
There's a family that is very dear to me. And in that family, in the entire family tree of spanning 2 generations, there's not a single female who was not molested and worse by a particular member of that family.
That's horrible.
And then even potentially one of the males. And just the pain that has come out in that family, and the ways that has impacted everyone's life in that family. And, you know, one of the family members being falsely accused for years, and just like this very terrible situation. And there's so much pain. And it's like, because this family matters so much to me, it's like I struggled with the resentment towards that individual who was the perpetrator. Right. And I still struggle with that, you know. But I still also try to be the only voice in the equation, you know, while respecting the sensitivity of the subject, the only voice in the equation that points to mercy somehow, even though I don't feel that. It's like,
but you have to, because
if not, you are literally contradicting the gospel. You're contradicting Christ's words, and that's so hard.
Yeah, because when the person was born, they didn't choose to be that way.
They are a victim.
They are a
Who
victim
knows what
also.
happened in his life that would lead him to have hurt so many people?
And how many crimes? I mean, you were a police officer.
Yeah,
Did you see where it was it literally just kept repeating and repeating and repeating?
Though I do not miss rape investigations. Those were extremely painful.
Yeah.
To have to investigate, and like you said, there's always two victims in the crime. You're absolutely right. I just want to go back to the suicide piece. I want to make sure people are clear about what the church teaches about that.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I think there's some people that think that when you commit suicide, you automatically go to hell. You don't get a funeral, all that
it's like
kind
a
of
straight
stuff.
ticket to hell. That's what people believe.
So we have to be clear that suicide is a violation of the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, because your life is not yours. You belong to God, right? Your life is God's. But there are mitigating circumstances with regard to suicide that can mitigate the culpability for the act. So, for example, mental illness.
Right.
There's a very clear example in my own life. Before my mom lived with us, the last 3 years of her life, she lived in a convalescent facility, assisted living community in Alabama, where my sister's a professor. So the priest at the parish, wonderful. I've met him. Wonderful. I've gone there when I went to visit my mom and gone to mass there. Nice. And in fact, the priest's father's a deacon at the same parish. So the priest there was an associate, newly ordained, wonderful, wonderful priest who committed suicide.
The priest did?
The priest committed suicide. Wow. But there was schizophrenia as part of the background. So he kept hearing voices, and the voices were having him do things, and he was trying to take medication, and I know from my own family, my wife being a psychologist, that the mental illness thing, sometimes it takes a while to get a correct diagnosis and get the right levels of medications to regulate things. And so during one of these episodes, he ended up actually killing himself. He was supposed to show up to mass, didn't show up. People were waiting, and so somebody should probably go check and see where he is. When he checked on him, he had committed suicide. So imagine, the devastation. But he still had a Catholic funeral because
he was the
mental illness mitigated. So he wasn't fully responsible. Remember, in order for a sin to be mortal, you have to have deliberate consent. One of the things is deliberate consent of the will. When you have mental illness,
it's hard to do that.
You're not fully in control. You don't fully have your full will because it's mental illnesses. So there are things that could mitigate.
You don't have the freedom
the culpability.
To choose not to.
Exactly.
And they're also, and I think, I don't think it even has to be anything as extreme as schizophrenia. I mean, what about like the post-traumatic stress?
Yeah.
You're right. Right. Schizophrenia is just an example.
Yeah, and like postpartum. And there are some people that literally will just have a break with something. Or, unfortunately, I think there's even times when people may be a victim of somebody else's cruelty. Like if a drug was put into something that they drank that they didn't know.
Or even just as simple as depression.
Yeah.
And
That's
why are they depressed? Well, there's wounds. There's a million different things that could just be a chemical imbalance. But we can't know. And so often, in that priest's example, that was diagnosed and they were trying to find the solution and they hadn't found it yet, I guess. Right. But a lot of times it's not diagnosed. A lot of times people are struggling and they don't understand why they're struggling and whatever. And then, looking at it from the outside looking in, it's like, you don't know what's going on in that person's mind. That person barely knows what's going on in their mind and their heart. And if something goes undiagnosed, that doesn't mean it's suddenly a mortal sin. It means you don't know. And so that's, I think, the brilliance of the God-man telling us not to judge other people.
There you go.
Because specifically not judging their eternal soul, right? We can judge actions and we can try to, like we talked before, fraternally correct each other. Yeah. But we cannot judge the outcome, their eternal outcome, because we don't know all the circumstances.
And we need to pray for them. I mean, we need to pray for their souls. I mean, it's so important because we don't ultimately, we're not in charge of where they go.
Yeah. So people that have had loved ones that committed suicide shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, I'm worried about, just trust in God's incredible mercy. And the second thing is, look, there may be people out there now, Ellen, I mean, you shared about, the sexual assaults that happened to you. There may be people watching right now who are really in need of God's mercy. I mean, you may have been raped, when you were in college. You may be the rapist. You know, you took advantage of a situation, you know, about, you know, power and control. Maybe you did it because you were abused when you were younger. You couldn't control what's happening to you.
Too.
And now you feel that you have to exercise power and control that you didn't have when it was happening to you. Maybe you were the fat kid in your class. Maybe you wore glasses. Maybe you were mocked and ridiculed because your family was poor. Maybe you wore braces. Maybe, whatever. Maybe your husband beat the hell out of you just because he felt like it. Or maybe he was drunk. Maybe you're struggling. Right now, as you're watching this and listening to this, you're fighting not to take another drink.
Amen.
You're fighting not to take another line of cocaine. You're struggling not to look at pornography. You may be estranged from your children right now, because they grew up practicing the faith, and now they're away from the faith. Some of them may not even believe in God anymore. And you're saying to yourself, I don't know what happened. They went to Catholic school. They got confirmed. They were part of a youth group. And I don't know what happened. And you blame yourself. You blame. And so that's why there is such an incredible need for God's mercy. And here's the other thing. God can't give you everything he wants to give you when you have that blockage there. It's like an artery that's blocked. The blood's trying to get through, and it can't. Divine mercy unclears the blockage. So some of us may be living with the anger and the resentment and the hatred and the feelings of the past. And if we can't get past that, then we can never find healing. We can never find true peace. Remember, what Nick read from the gospel a couple episodes ago, where Jesus said, my peace I leave to you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give it to you. So divine mercy is getting to the point of finding that peace. No matter what happened to you, no matter what. Look, I remember everything that happened in my house. I remember the abuse. I remember everything. But what I've come to understand is this. My past helped shape me into the person I am today, but my past does not determine my future.
And it doesn't define you.
A deep, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ determines my future.
Oh, yes. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that, Deacon. That, you never know who needs to hear what.
Yeah, because we're all struggling. Every single person is struggling with something. And sometimes they feel isolated and alone. What kind of, no one I could talk to, no one. But Jesus is always there. He's always there, willing and ready to give you his divine mercy. So I actually have 4 steps that I think people can, these are 4 steps that I again, this is not written in any book anywhere, or this is not, this is just right. This is what I came up with as far as reaching a point of healing with my dad. And I was grateful to be, maybe I'll end with that. I was grateful to be there when he died. But 4 things. First of all, don't try to cover up what happened. Don't try to suppress it.
Don't stuff it.
Because you're right. Don't stuff it. Don't stuff it down to yourself, because we have a tendency as human beings to put up a defense mechanism. Something happened. If I don't think about it, then it really didn't happen.
Right.
Don't do that, because it will come back to bite you and bite you hard.
Yeah, repression is bad.
No matter how you try to stuff it, it will come up. So just let it come up. And if you have to cry, then cry. If you have to scream, then scream. But just admit that, because once you bring it up, now God can say thank you for, just like Jesus had to bear himself on the cross, we have to sometimes open those wounds and bear ourselves so that Christ can there's a vehicle for healing, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is we have to rely on the weapons of God. The analogy I always use is David and Goliath, right? David tried to put on Saul's armor, and he's like, this doesn't, he took it off, because he realized you cannot defeat the Goliaths in your life with the weapons of man. And some of those Goliaths I mentioned a few minutes ago, right? The rape or the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it is. Whatever your Goliath. What is the Goliath in your life?
Amen.
That has you so scared that you're afraid to face whatever is keeping you from having a deep intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. The anger, the hatred, resentment. What is that Goliath for you? For you. And so fight with the weapons of God. So what did he take with him? He took a staff in his hand and a sling and 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag of wallet. And
the Spirit of God. Right? So
right.
The priest of the Lord which was anointed him with oil, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him.
Right, when he was chosen by Samuel, when God chose him to be of the eventual new king of Israel. And so he faced his Goliath armed with the weapons of God, right? And so if you think about it typologically, I think that sling of 5 smooth stones was a type
That's
of
the
rosary.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
because the 5 stones represent the 5 wounds of Christ, or each of the 5 joyful, sorrowful, luminous, and glorious mysteries of the rosary, right? So the type, I think he fought with a type of rosary. And what happened when he went to face his Goliath? Goliath tried to bite back. So when you finally fight with the weapons of the Lord against your Goliath in your life, that Goliath is going to try and fight back. Remember what Goliath said to David? Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?
Yes.
He's like, first of all, he was insulted. I'm a grown man. They send this boy out here to fight me, and instead of coming with armor and weapons, he comes with that thing.
Yeah.
Imagine your
Slingshot.
Goliath. Your Goliath in you right now is like, wait,
Yeah.
wait. Let me see if I've got this straight.
Yeah.
You think you can defeat me with your rosaries, with your Eucharistic adoration, and with your chapels of divine mercy? I'm Goliath. I'm your rapist. I'm alcohol. I'm porn. I'm drugs. And you think you can beat me?
Yeah, you can.
See, the Goliath is going to try and push back because he's been there for so long. He's very comfortable. And what does David say? God, I love this kid. You come to me with sword and javelin and spear. I come to you in the name of the Lord. Right? Recognizing that he was filled with the Spirit of God. That he doesn't fight alone. And that's what we have to remember, my friends. You don't have to face this alone. God is with you.
Yes.
Right? The third thing, general confession. General confession means you go to confession, confess all the sins you committed your entire life. Now, why would you do that? Because you said, well, I've already confessed that sin. It's already forgiven. Yes, that is true. That's not what it's about, because God forgets the sin, as it says in Ezekiel chapter 16. But what we're talking about here in the prodigal son, for example, is the beautiful part of that story is when the prodigal son finally has the courage to turn back to the father. He says when he's still a long way off, the father caught sight of him. See, so that means the father was looking for him the whole time. Even when he was in the pig pen, the father was looking for him. So what does the father do? Does the father wait for his son to get to him? No. Once he recognized the father, the son has made that began that journey back, the father ran to meet him. So when you go into that confessional and you confess, you say, wait a minute, I don't commit that sin anymore. Wait a minute, I don't commit that sin nearly as much as I used to in the past. See, you're closer to where you think you are, because sometimes you feel you're saying you're so far away. I killed my own baby. I'm so far away. There's no way God can forgive me for that. But when you confess it to the God's forgiveness, you recognize, wait a minute, I'm actually closer to where I thought I would be in my relationship with God. And then finally, the fourth one, and probably the hardest one, is to ask forgiveness for the person that hurt you for how you felt about them. So the way that manifested with my own life with my dad was he was sitting on the couch, and I went to him and I knelt down and I asked him to forgive me for hating him for 18 years.
Wow.
I asked him to forgive me for telling my children that he was dead.
Oh my gosh.
Now, some of you saying to yourself, what'd you do that for? He was the one, he should be apologizing to you. But that's not how divine mercy works. If you look at the beautiful image from St. Faustina, the rays are coming out from the heart of Jesus. So what God is asking, what God asked me in that moment, my dad, is to be a vehicle of mercy to him. And like you said, Ellen, in the beginning, it's not always reciprocated.
No,
that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is you being a vehicle of mercy.
Correct.
So that person can now be open to receiving God's mercy themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the hardest one of all.
Yeah.
To tell the person that hurt you that you forgive them for how you felt about. Whoa, that's huge. But often when people say, I went through the steps and it didn't work, Deacon. Did you do the last one? No. Because that's but look, every step that I just outlined is every step Jesus took to the cross.
And then if you're on the other
hard.
side of that and you're the person that's hurt people and you're finding this conviction and you're trying to come out of the dark places you've been that have led you to hurt people. Early in my process coming back to the Lord, or coming to the Lord in the first place, Christopher West was here in town, and he was instrumental in bringing me back to the Catholic Church, because what I heard that night about theology of the body changed everything. But one of the things he posited is that when we are repenting and we're coming back to God, we should apologize to the women that we've hurt as men. And he says that he did that, and I just was so moved. The Spirit was stirring in my heart, and I was just like, I've hurt a lot of women, and I don't know how I could possibly reach all of them, but I'm going to try. Mm-hmm. And I did. And I got such an interesting spectrum of reactions to my apologizing, because I was very honest in my apologies. You know, I remember one of them was like, I know how much you cared about me and how much you like wanted a serious relationship from me, and all I did was take advantage of your interest in me, to take advantage of your body. And the reaction, I mean, she was stunned, right? And it was like she didn't know what to do with that. And in another case, it was like, thank you so much for this. I've been praying for you ever since, you know.
Wow.
And it's like people, like it brought so much healing and closure to wounds that I had put in other people. And like it takes a lot of humility to do that.
There you go.
But man, you can really make a big difference for people's lives if you're willing to like put yourself on the line that way.
I'm so glad you shared that, because people think when I say that I'm crazy. That's like that no one could do that, but Jesus says nothing's impossible with God.
Right? Yeah.
But what you said was just so beautiful, because that illustrates beautifully exactly how divine mercy is supposed to work. And that was the same impetus that the Holy Spirit put on my heart to do with my dad. And the beautiful part, the way the story ends, I was with my dad. My dad died on October 5th, 2016. The Feast of St. Faustina, the Divine Mercy Saint, at exactly 3:00. By the way.
Oh my gosh!
I'm not even joking. I mean, every time, every at his anniversary at 3:00, the siblings will all text each other. I remember Pop at 3. He died at the hour of mercy on the feast. So I knew that eventually he's going to get to heaven. He's probably going to be in purgatory for a long time, but he's going to make it. You know, I was like, I mean, I knew that was a sign from God of his incredible love and mercy for my father. So imagine if God can bring that kind of love and healing into our family, to my father's life. Imagine what he can do for you.
Yeah, I'm amazed with his mercy every day.
It's endless.
Because
it's endless.
You know, in my journey, I discussed this on a previous episode that I'm in active recovery. I have been for 13 years. I'm, an alcoholic. In recovery, though, I haven't had a drink in over 13 years. By the grace of God, and only by the grace of God do I go, because there's no excuse for that. But I think in the 12-step program, of course, there's a period in it where you have to make amends. And without making amends, I mean, it's longer in the prayer. You can't, because you don't ever want to make amends where you harm another.
Right. Because
what good? You're not doing any good by hurting somebody else. I can remember the hardest amends I had to make was with my children.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Wow.
And, asking them for forgiveness for all the times that I was not a good mother. And I wasn't the person that God wanted me to be. And all the times that I let them down and I wasn't who God had wanted me to be. And I can remember with my son, God bless him, he took the brunt of most of it because he's the eldest. And I can remember we were riding in the car and we were talking. It wasn't like a formal amends, you know what I mean? Because you never know how an amends is going to happen. You just don't. You know, we're just so not in charge. And we're driving down the road, and he was telling me about something that I had done to him when he was little that I had absolutely no memory of. To this day, I have no memory of it because, unfortunately, I was a blackout drinker, which is crappy. And he looked at me. He looked me dead in the eyes, and he was like, "You don't remember, do you, Mom?" And I just broke down crying. And he was like, "Wow." And I just looked at him and I said, "I'm so sorry." Because all I could tell him was I was sorry, apologizing for something that I don't even remember doing.
Wow.
And at that moment, our relationship changed. And it was my son and I had a hard, and I take responsibility for my role in it. But that moment, God's mercy was so sitting in that car, because from that point forward, he knew I was telling him the truth, but he also knew I was sorry. But more than anything, I had the knowledge that even though I had done that horrible thing to him, he still wanted to forgive me.
Wow.
He still wanted to have an answer. You know what I mean? And he was brave enough to talk about something that was so hard to talk about. And he was young. I mean, you know, I think he was 18. I mean, you know, it wasn't like he's much older now.
But God was in that.
But God, I mean, God was in the car. And, you know, and in my journey, I was still not, you know, God didn't really start. I mean, he was always moving in my life, but he didn't like the call, as I call it. You know, whatever it is, the Holy Spirit, whatever happens when God says, okay, I want you. You're going to do this now. I was still far from that. You know, it took a long time to get to where I was healthy enough, you know, to do what needed to be done. But like, just remember, you know, sometimes by being vulnerable and even apologizing for something, you don't even know what you did.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know what that's going to turn into.
Exactly.
And you just got to trust God enough to be like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And if you don't really have a really close relationship with God, all you got to do is ask him and you can start building one. I mean, you know, for all those that are listening that are like, oh crap, you know what I mean? I don't even know who Jesus is. You know what I mean? Or I think I know him, but I don't really know him. You know what I mean? And what does that look like? And I'm just going to tell you, you don't have to do anything stellar. You don't have to do anything huge. You literally can just sit quietly and go, God, help me. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And just watch and wait, and you will be amazed at his mercy. I promise you.
Yeah. See, what vulnerability does, what we're doing here, the three of us, I think in sharing our vulnerabilities in this, it creates space in your heart for God's mercy to enter in and to really bring a deep level of healing. Because remember, God's not going to force his love on you. God can only give what we're willing to receive from him.
That's correct.
With all the hatred and anger, resentment, that blocks God's mercy from entering, because he's not going to force. You have to open and empty so he can fill.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to forgive, and sometimes it'll be reciprocal, and sometimes it won't. I mean, it could have gone totally different with my son. I'm like not in charge, you know what I mean, of that. But
But and you're right, because an initial reaction may be, you know, like if maybe one of the women that you talked to, Nick, said, I hate you. You're really what you did to me, even though you apologized. But then as they begin to reflect, you know, because God works in his time, and God's timing is always perfect. It ain't our time.
Amen.
It may take time for that person, because every person is different, to process what just happened, to think about what happened, to take time, you know.
Because it's awkward as hell to have someone that hurt you come up to you and apologize to you, especially if it's years later. It's like, what is happening right now? What are you doing?
And especially if you've been harboring a resentment.
Yeah.
Because then you're kind of like, oh,
brings up memories for them that they don't want to remember.
Yeah.
And now you're stimulating memories that they were trying to forget.
Yeah.
You know, but that's part of the healing for them. Even though they don't recognize it yet, that's part of healing for them as well.
Deacon, if you would share, because I think this is the perfect way to take this out, what your mother did for your father.
Oh, yeah. So,
because this is the perfect act of mercy. If you want to know what mercy looks like, this is it.
When I left Jersey to move out west, my mother said, the only thing I want you to do before you leave this house is pray for your father. And I said, no. And I think it was the only time I looked my mother in the face and told her no. That I can remember. And my mother was like 4'11" or something.
Aww.
And she said, I don't think you heard me, son. And I said, the last thing I want you to do before you leave the house is promise you pray for your father. Okay, whatever. So I throw his name at the end of my prayers. Didn't really mean it, but I just told my mom I would. So fast forward, when we had the first level of healing with my dad came out to Oregon. To meet his grandkids. This was, at this point, for me, it was 18 years.
18 years.
For my mom, was 20 years. So my dad came and saw my mom, and I don't know what they talked about because I left the room, but all I know is that my mom, a couple of months later, my mom told me that that they reconciled.
Wow.
Now, they never got back together or anything like that. But whatever happened between them, it was worked out at the time that they met. In fact, the whole time, my mom never took her wedding ring off. You know, even though she was divorced, never took that. She literally died with it on. And what she told me was that from the day she asked me to pray for my father until my father came out 20 years later, she said, I prayed a rosary every day with the sole intention of reconciling with your father before I die.
Wow.
And I said, Mommy, wait a minute. You're telling me you prayed a rosary every day for Pop? Yes. Mommy, what happened after year 10? After year 15? Mommy, after year 20? A rosary every day? Yes. And you never stopped? No. I don't have faith like that.
It's amazing.
And my mom died a month later.
Oh my gosh.
With
a month later.
And God's grace. I mean, God's mercy. That's God's mercy.
Yeah.
But so you also have to do the work.
20 years
20
of
years.
praying a rosary every day.
That's God's timing.
And they reconciled. And whatever happened, it was beautiful because my father was definitely moved by whatever happened. My mom obviously was. So God was able to bring a level of healing that was definitely supernatural. I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's just
beautiful. So that's a good way to end mercy because, wow, this was a big one, guys. We did a big one. So we got more coming. So come back next time. Thank you very much. God bless everybody.
Take care.
And forgive. It's much
and we'll
better
be praying
than
for you.
And we're praying for you.